Let's begin here, because many mistake a man's strength for the mask he wears. You see the job, the car, the steady handshake. You see order and composure. Yet beneath it all, there remains a silence he cannot name. He controls the outer world, but the inner world waits untouched. The truth is that what moves him most is not achievement or admiration, but a subtle presence that slips past his defenses. It is not the obvious that reaches his soul, but the symbolic. And when it happens, he feels as if a hidden door has been opened without a key. Before I continue, let me know where you're listening from in the comments. And if reflections like this resonate, don't forget to like and subscribe. Many believe a man falls in love with surface qualities, beauty, charm, accomplishment. But what actually stirs him is far less visible. It might be a quiet gesture, a steady gaze, or the way someone inhabits herself without apology. Jung reminded us that the soul seeks mirrors, not possessions. The unconscious is not moved by control, but by resonance. And in that mirror, a man sees fragments of himself, long denied. This is why he can feel deeply affected without understanding why. He may even pull away, returning to the safety of what is predictable. Outwardly, he continues with his routines. Inwardly, something has shifted, because what touched him was not a demand for attention, but the reflection of his own unspoken longing. Here is the paradox. His persona tells him to remain strong, rational, and untouchable. Yet his shadow contains the fragility he has hidden, the desire to be seen, to be allowed tenderness, to rest from performance. And when he meets authenticity in another, that shadow stirs. It is not her role or her effort that matters. It is the symbol she embodies: freedom, groundedness, a truth that cannot be bargained. This beginning is not about romance alone. It is about the awakening of the self. What truly disarms a man is not conquest or persuasion, but the encounter with what he has not yet integrated. And from that meeting, whether brief or lasting, the deeper story of transformation begins. What follows the first stirrings of the soul is rarely calm. When something or someone touches a hidden place inside us, the surface of life begins to tremble. The carefully built routines, the persona we present to the world, suddenly feel thinner. At first, this may appear only as a subtle tension, a restlessness you cannot quite name, but underneath a deeper fracture is forming. For many men, this fracture emerges as distance. He may retreat into work, into tasks, into the predictable. He may laugh, make plans, and appear unchanged. Yet in silence, he carries the aftertaste of a presence that unsettled him. The more he tries to rationalize it, the more it escapes his grasp, because what was touched in him was not logical. It was symbolic. Jung often reminded us that the unconscious does not move by reason, but by images, symbols, and forgotten truths. When something in the outer world mirrors that inner landscape, the effect is undeniable. It cannot be explained with statistics or schedules. It shows itself in the unease that lingers in the thoughts that return without invitation. And so the fracture grows wider between the image of control and the reality of being moved by something he cannot command. This moment is often misunderstood. Many women may believe that his distance is proof of disinterest. Many men may believe that their retreat is strength. Yet both miss the deeper truth. What is happening is not rejection, but disruption. His familiar structures no longer hold. His persona, that mask of certainty, begins to slip, and with it, the fear that someone has seen too much. In daily life, this fracture may look simple. He stops calling as often. He buries himself in work. He avoids the spaces where silence might expose him. Yet this avoidance is itself a symptom. It reveals that something has been stirred which he cannot yet face. The more he hides, the clearer the fracture becomes. For his unconscious has already been marked. Here lies the paradox of the human soul. What we most long for is also what we most resist. A man longs to be seen beyond his roles, yet when someone truly sees him, he feels unprepared. Vulnerability exposes not only tenderness, but also fear. The shadow rises fear of abandonment, fear of inadequacy, fear that his worth lies only in control. This is why he withdraws. It is not because the experience was shallow, but because it was too deep. Think of the shadow as a locked room in the house of the soul. For years, the man avoids it. He builds the rest of the house, arranges it neatly, invites guests into the polished rooms. Yet one day, someone walks by that closed door and hears a sound from within. She does not force it open. She does not even ask. But by her presence, she reminds him that the locked room still exists. And suddenly, the man cannot unhear it. That is the fracture. It is the recognition that his inner fortress has cracks that his defenses cannot protect him forever. At first, he may deny it. He may convince himself that nothing happened. He may even ridicule the feeling. Yet no amount of denial can erase the truth of what was stirred. In fact, denial often deepens the fracture because now he must split himself into two: the persona that pretends nothing is wrong, and the unconscious that refuses to be silenced. Jung wrote that what we resist not only persists, it grows stronger. The fracture proves this. The more a man resists what touched him, the more it occupies his inner life. He may dream of her presence. He may catch echoes in the gestures of strangers. He may sense her in music, in silence, in the quiet moments when he is alone. He cannot escape the symbol she embodied because it was never about her alone. It was about what she reflected, his own hidden self. For women, this stage can be deeply confusing. She may wonder why he disappears just when everything seemed alive. She may question her worth, thinking she did something wrong. Yet the truth is simpler and harder. She touched a place he was not yet ready to enter. Her authenticity reflected back his shadow, and he recoiled. This is not her failure. It is his confrontation. The fracture is necessary. Without it, no growth occurs. A smooth life may look safe, but it rarely transforms. Only when the mask cracks does the real face begin to emerge. The fracture exposes the tension between persona and soul, between the man he thinks he must be and the man he truly is. This tension, though painful, is the soil of awakening. Consider how often in life we confuse control with safety. We cling to routines, to images, to roles, thinking they will protect us from pain. But control cannot save us from ourselves. It cannot silence the parts of the soul that wait to be acknowledged. The fracture is the reminder that life cannot be lived only on the surface. Depth demands entry, even if it begins with discomfort. For the man, this fracture is frightening. It threatens his identity, his patterns, his sense of mastery. But beneath the fear lies the gift, the possibility of becoming whole. Because wholeness does not come from strengthening the mask. It comes from integrating the parts of himself that he has long denied. And the only reason the fracture hurts so much is because it reveals just how much has been hidden. This is why so many encounters end here. The man pulls away, convinced that leaving restores his power. The woman steps back, unsure of what happened. Both feel the loss, but the unconscious has already begun its work. What was touched cannot be erased. The fracture once formed will continue to widen until the truth is faced. In Jungian language, this is the beginning of individuation. Individuation is not a gentle path. It often begins with rupture, the tearing of old skins, the breaking of illusions. The first fracture is not failure, but invitation. It says, look within, for the outer shell can no longer hold all that you are. And so the story deepens. What seemed like distance is actually the stirring of the soul. What looked like rejection is actually the first step into transformation. The fracture hurts because it matters. It is the sign that the unconscious is calling, and the man, whether he admits it or not, has already heard the voice. When we see this stage clearly, compassion grows. We understand that retreat does not always mean indifference. Often, it means the soul is wrestling with a truth too heavy to carry openly. The fracture is both wound and doorway. It is both loss and beginning. This is the turning point that leads us further. From here, the mask and the shadow will come face to face. The fracture has been made. The question now is whether it will close in denial or open into awakening. Once the fracture has opened, the struggle begins in earnest. The man who once moved through life with quiet certainty now finds himself torn between two worlds. On one side stands the persona, the polished mask that shows composure, mastery, and control. On the other side waits the shadow, that hidden reservoir of feelings he has long denied. When these two finally meet, the tension can feel unbearable. The persona whispers that everything is fine, that nothing has changed. It urges him to return to the familiar roles, to double down on the image that once kept him safe. Yet the shadow tells another story. It surfaces in dreams, in sudden emotions, in restless nights, where no distraction can soothe him. The shadow does not speak in words. It speaks in symbols, the glance that lingers, the memory that will not fade, the sensation of being seen without defense. Here lies the cost of a divided life. The more he invests in maintaining the mask, the more the shadow demands recognition. He becomes exhausted from holding both at once. Outwardly, he appears confident, reliable, in control. Inwardly, he feels fragile, uncertain, even afraid. This gap between the outer show and the inner truth drains him, for it requires constant effort to keep the facade intact. Jung taught that the shadow is not our enemy, though it often feels that way. It is the part of us that carries everything we have disowned: tenderness, fear, creativity, longing. For many men, these qualities have been hidden since childhood, pushed aside in favor of strength and certainty. But the soul does not forget. When someone touches him in a way he cannot explain, those denied parts rise from their hiding places. The persona resists this exposure. It says, "You must be steady. You must not show weakness. You must not let anyone see how deeply you are moved." And yet the unconscious has already been touched. This is why he may seem conflicted, sending mixed signals, pulling close and then pulling away. He is not only confused about her, he is confused about himself. The mask no longer fits yet. Removing it feels impossible. This is the moment when projection often appears. The man, unable to face his own shadow, begins to project it outward. He may idealize her as extraordinary, as though she alone contains the qualities he lacks. Or he may criticize her, pushing away the very traits that frightened and fascinated him. Projection is the unconscious way of avoiding responsibility. Instead of saying, "This is in me," he says, "This is in her." Yet projection cannot last forever. The more he avoids his own feelings, the more they return in disguised forms. Irritability, restlessness, obsessive thoughts, all are signs that the inner conflict remains unresolved. The soul insists on balance, and when denied, it finds ways to remind us of what has been neglected. For women, this stage is equally complex. To embody authenticity without demanding it is to stand in contrast to his divided state. Her presence highlights his contradiction. A man who appears strong, but feels fragile. A man who seems certain, but is quietly lost. Without intending it, she becomes a mirror of his inner struggle. And mirrors are rarely comfortable. This is why so many men retreat to substitutes. They chase surface-level attention, seek temporary validation, or bury themselves in achievement. They believe these will restore their balance. But these are only bandages on a deeper wound. The shadow waits patiently, and no amount of distraction can silence it. The cost of avoidance grows heavier with time. Jung reminded us that until the unconscious becomes conscious, it will direct your life, and you will call it fate. This is the danger of ignoring the shadow. The man begins to repeat patterns without understanding why relationships that falter, intimacy that feels empty, a sense of chasing something always out of reach. He believes the problem lies outside, but the true battle is within. The persona, though polished, is brittle. It cannot withstand the weight of a soul that longs for wholeness. The shadow, though frightening, is fertile. It contains the keys to authenticity, to tenderness, to real connection. The struggle between them is not a battle to be won, but a tension to be integrated. Only by admitting the shadow does the man begin to dissolve the mask. Imagine the symbol of a mirror. When he looks into it with the mask on, he sees only the surface, the role, the appearance, the persona. But when the shadow rises, the mirror deepens. He sees what lies behind the mask. Fear, longing, the vulnerability he swore to hide. At first, he resists the image. He wants to smash the mirror, to deny what it shows. Yet over time, he realizes that breaking the mirror will not erase the truth. The reflection lives within. The shadow also carries gifts. Within the fear of fragility lies the capacity for tenderness. Within the fear of abandonment lies the capacity for devotion. Within the fear of inadequacy lies the hunger for growth. By hiding these parts, the man not only avoids pain, he also avoids the richness of his own soul. The encounter with authenticity exposes both loss and possibility. This stage of conflict is often the most painful because it is the stage of indecision. He cannot yet release the mask, yet he cannot forget what has been stirred. He lives in between, pulled by two currents. To the outside world, he may seem distant, distracted, or inconsistent. To himself, he feels divided as though two voices speak at once. This is the cost of refusing to choose. For the woman who embodies authenticity, the challenge is also clear. She may feel tempted to explain, to fix, to draw him closer. Yet her greatest strength is in remaining true to herself. By standing in her dignity, she refuses to enter his battle for him. She allows him the space to meet his shadow on his own terms. And though this often leads to distance, it is also the only path that leads to real transformation. In many ways, this struggle between persona and shadow mirrors the larger human condition. We all wear masks. We all hide parts of ourselves. We all fear the vulnerability of being fully seen. Yet without this confrontation, individuation cannot begin. The mask must crack, so the soul can breathe. The shadow must be acknowledged, so the self can grow whole. The third stage, then, is not about resolution, but recognition. It is the acknowledgement that the inner war exists, that the mask is no longer enough, and that the shadow will not be silenced. This recognition is the necessary bridge. From here, the path turns toward awakening, the moment when the man finally understands that what he seeks outside is actually within. The cost of avoiding the shadow is repetition. The gift of facing it is transformation. This is the choice that now stands before him. The fracture has revealed the wound. The struggle has revealed the mask. And now, the soul begins to whisper of another way. Every transformation begins with recognition, but awakening begins with surrender. The mask can only be worn for so long before it grows heavy, and the shadow can only be denied for so long before it insists on being seen. When the strain becomes too great, the soul takes its first step toward truth. This step is rarely planned. It comes in quiet moments, in silence, in pauses, when the old way of living no longer makes sense. At first, awakening feels like disorientation. A man may sense that the life he built no longer satisfies him, though nothing on the surface has changed. He may carry the same responsibilities, speak the same words, maintain the same smile, yet something inside resists. He can no longer rest in the certainty of his persona. What once felt solid now feels hollow. What once gave pride now feels shallow. This is the threshold, the moment when the unconscious begins to demand its place in consciousness. Jung called this the meeting of the self, and the unconscious the beginning of individuation. It is the recognition that we are not just the roles we play, but the totality of what we are, including what we deny. Awakening requires honesty, and honesty requires courage. To look inward is to see both the beauty and the wounds, the potential and the fear, the forgotten tenderness and the long-avoided grief. Symbols often guide this stage. A dream repeats. A song lingers. A sudden memory rises that feels charged with meaning. These are not accidents. The unconscious speaks in images, and when the soul is ready, the images multiply. They remind the man that his journey is not only outward, but inward, that his longing for connection is in fact a longing for wholeness. Awakening also brings contradiction. He may still long for the presence that stirred him, imagining she alone holds the key. Yet slowly, he begins to realize that what he seeks is not her possession, but his reflection. She awakened qualities within him that he did not know how to claim. Freedom, authenticity, groundedness. These were never hers alone. They were waiting in him silent and unseen until her presence made them visible. This is why the awakening can feel both painful and liberating. Painful because he realizes he has lived far from himself. Liberating because he now knows he is capable of more. The shadow, once terrifying, becomes a guide. The mask, once necessary, becomes a burden he is willing to set down. He begins to ask questions he has avoided for years. Who am I when no one is watching? What qualities do I admire in others because I have not yet allowed them in myself? What part of me longs to breathe? Awakening is not a loud event. It does not arrive with fireworks or grand declarations. It often arrives with stillness, with a moment of deep seeing. Perhaps it is an evening walk when the air feels different, or a solitary morning when he cannot hide from his reflection. The realization comes quietly but unmistakably. I have been living half a life, and the other half waits within me. For many, this stage is the first true taste of freedom. Not the freedom of doing whatever one wishes, but the freedom of being what one truly is. It is the freedom that comes when you no longer chase validation, when you no longer fear silence, when you no longer cling to masks that keep you unseen. This freedom frightens and excites at once because it carries responsibility. To awaken is to admit, I must now live differently. Jung often spoke of the anima, the inner feminine, in a man's psyche. When a woman embodies authenticity, she awakens this image. He does not fall in love merely with her. He falls in love with the part of himself that she represents. Awakening then is the recognition that she was a mirror, not a possession. Her presence showed him what he could become. The work now is to claim it for himself. This realization softens his perception of the past. Where once he blamed her for leaving, he now thanks her for not staying. Her departure becomes the symbol that forced him inward. It taught him that love is not about control or need, but about reflection and growth. She was not the final destination. She was the threshold. Awakening means he can now honor that threshold without clinging to it. Awakening also changes how he views vulnerability. What once felt like weakness now feels like strength. To admit fragility is not to collapse. It is to stand honestly. To acknowledge fear is not to surrender. It is to face reality. The man begins to understand that love requires this honesty, and that the only path to real intimacy is through vulnerability. The shadow taught him this. What he once repressed becomes the very foundation of his transformation. At this stage, others may notice subtle shifts. He listens more deeply. He speaks with less pretense. He is less interested in impressing and more interested in connecting. His energy changes because he no longer seeks to dominate. He seeks to align. These shifts may seem small, but they signal the soul's new orientation. The mask is loosening and the self is stepping forward. Awakening does not erase the struggle. The shadow still whispers. The persona still tempts the old patterns, still tug, but the difference is awareness. He now knows what is happening inside him. He can see the push and pull with clearer eyes. And once you see, you cannot unsee. Awareness is the seed of transformation. It does not complete the journey, but it guarantees that the journey has begun. In the imagery of Jung, awakening is like standing before a mirror that finally reflects the whole self. For years, he has seen only fragments. Now, the reflection grows fuller, showing both the light and the dark. It is not always comfortable, but it is real. And reality, even when difficult, is the ground of true love and true life. For women listening, this stage carries its own wisdom. When you live authentically, you awaken others without trying. Your presence alone can stir what has been buried. But remember, his awakening is his responsibility. You are the mirror, not the savior. Your dignity lies in remaining true to yourself, not in carrying another through their struggle. Awakening is the turning point of the story. The fracture revealed the wound. The struggle revealed the mask. Now the mirror reveals the possibility of becoming whole. From this moment forward, the path is no longer about denial, but about choice. Will he continue to live divided? Or will he step into the slow, patient work of integration? The beauty of awakening is that it changes the question. No longer does he ask, "How do I get her back?" Instead, he asks, "How do I meet myself?" And in that shift, the true journey begins. Because the soul does not ultimately seek another person. It seeks its own wholeness. Love becomes not just an encounter, but a path, a way of returning to oneself through the mirror of another. The awakening is only the beginning, but it is the moment that changes everything, because it is the first time the man stops running. He stands, he feels, he sees, and from that stillness, the long path of individuation opens before him. Awakening brings clarity, but clarity alone is not enough. At some point, every soul must decide what to do with what it now sees. Awareness without action becomes another disguise, another mask of avoidance. Transformation requires choice, and choice in this stage always arrives through boundaries. The man who once lived, split between persona and shadow, now faces a new task. He must draw a line between the life he has performed and the life he intends to live. This is never easy. It means risking misunderstanding, letting go of habits, and refusing the roles that once defined him. But every true act of growth begins this way. To protect what is emerging within, he must set new standards. Jung reminded us that individuation is not about perfection, but about integration. A boundary is the outer expression of that integration. It says, "I will no longer betray myself for approval. I will no longer remain silent where truth must be spoken. I will no longer confuse control with love." These choices are small in action, but profound in meaning, because they signal that the man is beginning to live from his center rather than his mask. For women, this truth carries its own reflection: the boundary of dignity, the quiet refusal to beg to chase, to diminish oneself, is itself a profound act of transformation. It demonstrates that love cannot thrive in places where the self is sacrificed. And when she chooses self-respect, she embodies the very symbol that once awakened him: authenticity without apology. Boundaries are not walls, they are doors. They do not shut life out, but guide it inward. When a man finally chooses to speak honestly about what he feels, or when he refuses to keep repeating shallow patterns, he is not closing himself off. He is creating the conditions in which his deeper self can breathe. This is the essence of transformation, not louder promises, but clearer space for truth. It is important to see that every choice has consequence. To choose authenticity means losing the comfort of the mask. To set boundaries means disappointing those who benefited from his old patterns. To honor the self means stepping into unfamiliar territory where control no longer dictates the terms. And yet, these very consequences are what make the choice sacred. They mark the difference between living asleep and living awake. Consider how often people confuse compromise with connection. Compromise that denies the soul is not intimacy. It is surrender to fear. True connection arises when two people meet without masks, without manipulation, without the silent demand that one must shrink for the other to feel safe. This is why boundaries are transformative. They protect the ground where real connection can grow. The man's first act of transformation may be simple. It may be as small as admitting I am afraid, or as clear as saying, I will not continue what feels empty. The outer form matters less than the inner alignment. Each step affirms that he will no longer abandon his own truth. And slowly, this changes the rhythm of his life. Jung often spoke of the self as a guiding center, a symbol of wholeness that transcends ego. When a man sets his first boundary, he is not just protecting his feelings. He is aligning with this deeper center. The self does not demand approval. The self does not bargain for worth. It simply asks for honesty. And every time he chooses honesty over pretense, he strengthens his connection to this inner source. Transformation also shifts the quality of his relationships. Those built on performance begin to fall away. Those drawn to his old mask may no longer recognize him. This can be painful, but it is also necessary. New connections begin to appear, not because he seeks them, but because his presence has changed. Others who value authenticity are drawn to him, sensing the quiet power of someone who is finally at home in himself. For women, the same truth applies. When she chooses to walk away rather than stay where she is unseen, she becomes a living example of individuation in practice. Her boundary is not punishment. It is clarity. It tells the world, I will not confuse sacrifice with love. And in that act, she not only honors herself, but also awakens others to the same truth. Boundaries also test endurance. To hold them is to resist the pull of old habits. There will be moments when fear whispers, return to the mask, return to what is safe, return to what requires no courage. But the man now knows too much to return completely. Once awakened, he cannot fully forget. Each time he honors his boundary, even in small ways, he reinforces the transformation taking root in his soul. There is also humility in this stage. Transformation does not mean perfection, and boundaries do not mean rigidity. They are living expressions adjusted as the self grows. To hold a boundary with compassion, neither harsh nor apologetic, is the sign of maturity. It shows that he no longer acts from fear or pride, but from alignment with what is true. This stage of choice and boundary also redefines love itself. Where once love was sought as possession now, it becomes a meeting of two whole selves. Where once love was confused with control, now it is recognized as freedom. Where once love was fueled by insecurity, now it grows from dignity. The man learns that to truly give love, he must first honor himself. And the woman learns that her greatest gift is her presence, not her sacrifice. Transformation is never instantaneous. It unfolds gradually, like dawn breaking after a long night. The first light is fragile, but it signals that a new day has begun. Each boundary is a sunrise. Each act of honesty is another ray of light. Slowly, the darkness of denial fades, and the landscape of the soul becomes clearer. What once was feared vulnerability, fragility, tenderness, becomes the ground of strength. The man discovers that when he speaks honestly, he does not collapse. When he shows his shadow, he does not lose respect. Instead, he gains what he always longed for: connection that does not require performance. This is the fruit of transformation, the reward of choosing boundaries that honor the self. Jung said that the privilege of a lifetime is to become who you truly are. This privilege is not given. It is chosen again and again in the small moments of daily life. Every time you choose your truth over your mask, you take part in this privilege. Every time you honor your boundary rather than betray yourself, you step deeper into individuation. And with each step, the self grows stronger, the shadow grows lighter, and the mask dissolves. This is the heart of transformation. Not the end of struggle, but the willingness to live differently because of what you have seen. The fracture has become a doorway. The mask has been loosened. The shadow has become a guide. And through choice and boundary, the soul begins to inhabit its own freedom. From here, the journey moves toward completion. The man who once feared being seen now learns to see himself clearly. The woman who once carried the weight of proving her worth now rests in her dignity. Both discover that true love does not require sacrifice of the self, but the sharing of it. This is the gift of transformation, a life lived not from fear, but from presence. Every journey must return to silence. After the struggle, after the awakening, after the painful work of setting boundaries, what remains is not noise, but clarity. What began as confusion and resistance now settles into understanding. The man no longer asks why someone entered his life and then stepped away. He now sees that her role was never to stay, but to reveal. This is the essence of closure. Not the erasing of memory, not the rewriting of history, but the ability to hold the past without being held by it. Where once he felt haunted by absence, he now feels guided by presence. She is no longer a wound, but a symbol. She no longer represents loss, but initiation, the beginning of his return to himself. Jung often said that we do not fall in love with another person alone, but with the qualities of our own soul that we glimpse in them. This truth explains why such encounters leave such lasting marks. What touched him was not her beauty, her words, or her gestures. It was the reflection of his own hidden wholeness mirrored back through her authenticity. Closure means he no longer confuses that reflection with the person who carried it. He no longer searches for her face in strangers or tries to recover what has already fulfilled its purpose. He understands now what he longed for was already within him. What she awakened was his own capacity to feel deeply, to live honestly, to love without fear. In this stage, gratitude replaces longing. He remembers her with respect, not desperation. He honors the way her boundary, her quiet refusal to betray herself, became the mirror that forced him to change. He sees that her dignity was not rejection, but a gift. Without it, he would still be asleep, still clinging to a mask. For women, this truth carries deep reassurance. Choosing yourself, even when misunderstood, is never wasted. The silence you hold, the boundaries you draw, the dignity you protect. These are the very forces that awaken others. They may resist at first. They may withdraw or misunderstand. But in time, your self-respect becomes the lesson they cannot forget. Closure also redefines love itself. Love is not possession, not control, not the endless effort to convince someone to stay. Love is a mirror that reveals the self. Sometimes the mirror remains. Sometimes it passes through quickly. In both cases, the gift is the same, the invitation to become more whole. This is why loss does not always mean failure. Sometimes the greatest encounters are the briefest ones. They do not come to provide comfort, but to spark transformation. They remind us of qualities we had forgotten, and they leave us with the responsibility to embody those qualities ourselves. In this sense, closure is not about forgetting. It is about integration. The energy of that encounter is no longer external. It is internal, woven into the fabric of the self. He carries her not as a figure he must chase, but as a compass pointing inward. She is no longer an unanswered question, but a symbol of the life he now chooses to live. The final lesson here is simple. Though not easy to honor what is past without clinging, and to honor what has been awakened by living it forward. The man who once feared vulnerability now learns to rest in it. The woman who once feared being misunderstood now sees her silence as strength. Both discover that real love begins with truth, not demand. Jung wrote that what we accept transforms us. Closure is the act of acceptance. It is the moment when you no longer hide from your shadow, no longer chase your projections, no longer confuse another person's presence with your own wholeness. It is the moment when you can finally say, I am enough to meet myself. And so the story ends not with reunion, but with integration. He no longer begs the past to return. He no longer blames the one who left. Instead, he thanks the encounter for showing him the door, and he walks through it. That door leads not outward, but inward to a life that is more whole, more honest, more capable of love. As you listen, perhaps you feel the echo of your own encounters, those brief but unforgettable meetings that left you changed. Perhaps you were the one who awakened another without realizing it. Or perhaps you were the one awakened left with questions that only time could answer. Either way, know this: nothing was wasted. Every true encounter serves the soul. The takeaway is not to hold on, but to live forward. To embody the qualities you once saw reflected outside of you. To walk with dignity, to honor your boundaries, to love from presence rather than from need. This is the gift of individuation, to become who you truly are, and to meet others not from emptiness, but from wholeness. Remember this final image, love, as a mirror. The face in the mirror may change, the person may come and go, but what you saw, reflected, remains yours. It was always yours. Closure is knowing that the mirror did not give you your soul. It revealed it, and once revealed, it can never be taken away. So let this reflection rest in you. Let it remind you that every ending carries a seed of beginning, every absence leaves behind a presence, and every boundary teaches love in its truest form. Now, I leave you with this question. Have you ever met someone who touched your soul, not by staying, but by leaving? Did their silence teach you more than their words could have? Share your story below. It may be the reminder another heart needs tonight.